All right, hey everybody, welcome to Digging Deeper. We are here, Pete and Brandon, continuing our discussion going through the book of Colossians. This is week 4 or 5 now, but we're still in chapter 2. Actually, just started chapter 2.
We're going to hit the speed button though quick.
Yeah, get through it quick.
Yeah.
A lot of the big ideas you kind of cover up front when you do books of the Bible anyway,
Yeah.
and then you kind of can go quicker. I remember we did the book of Acts. It was like the first
2 months for chapters 1 and 2.
And then we threw through like 20 chapters because you
Yeah.
really get the heart of it at the beginning and then you can go quicker. But yeah, so this week you were in the first 10 verses of chapter 2 talking about Paul's agony for the church and desire for them and that they would have roots that go deep in things. And so we, as you were talking, I was thinking a little bit about your opening story about digging in your neighbor's lawn, and something that sort of stuck with me was just the way that I think of those kind of things differently as I get older. And when I was younger, I would have thought like you, like, oh, no big deal. And I'd have been like, why is this person being grumpy? It's just a hole. But then being an adult, you're like, oh, I see, that would really infuriate me. And as you were talking about that, I felt just in my own heart, God's sort of saying like, are there areas that maybe I have gotten a little too old and grumpy about, or I need to be soft-hearted about, especially as somebody that oversees the facility, you know? And I'm just wondering, like, are there areas in your own life and as a pastor, as a leader, that, I don't know, maybe it's like just perspective has changed as you've gotten older and you see things differently than maybe you did when you were younger and first starting ministry. Are there areas like that in your life or your ministry?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, even if someone came and dug a hole in my yard today, they were like, oh, I got this treasure map.
You'd grab the shovel
I'd be like,
and bury him in that hole.
Yeah, you just dug your own grave, dude. Like, so I definitely think there are things that you just, as you get older, one, you get more particular, but also like you move from having just a limited vision of things to a broader scope. So like whether it be in parenting, right? When you're a kid or a teenager, you see things through one lens, and then eventually you get older and you have your own kids. You're like, oh, that's why my parents did that. And that's why they treat me that way. And I think in ministry, the same is true. Like this is my first time, over the last 10 years being a lead pastor. Up to that point, I was a youth pastor, a college pastor. So I just had my particular ministry that I was trying to think about. I wasn't considering like my event amidst all the other events going on in the church, or my budget versus all the other budgets, and what are the other superfluous things that take place that can really shipwreck a budget, right? Like in church world, you can have the budget set, but you weren't planning for the HVAC to go out, or you weren't planning for someone to decide to deface your property, which has happened here multiple times by some of our transient individuals. And those are things that like, you just don't think about that. All you're doing is digging your hole in your yard, trying to find the buried treasure, not considering like, hey, that person, it's not just their yard, but that's going to cost them money. Yeah. That's going to then impact something else that they were planning on doing. Like, I don't know, maybe Tukey was saving up for a new car and now she has to get new, grass seed and everything else. I don't know. But like, you just see things a lot broader than when you're younger.
Yeah. And so I guess where that led is you kind of started off looking at this word that I really I didn't know enjoyed. You talked about this word that we translate agonizing, and you compared it to or talked about how its roots have this sense of being in an arena and cheering and agonizing over wanting to see somebody win. And I thought, for one, that really was interesting to me. I hadn't heard that before, but it makes a lot of sense seeing Paul's perspective. And I was thinking about like the tension that can exist between you agonizing over someone wanting to exist, but then them doing dumb things or digging a hole, and you're like, no, not that. And it's like, on the one hand, you can, when you're agonizing over somebody and you want them to succeed, sometimes it can almost sound a little bit like you get nitpicky, like as a parent being like, stop doing that, because you're agonizing over your child's success, but you can almost end up sounding like, get off my lawn, I'm just wondering, as a pastor, as somebody that, we spend our lives getting on a stage sort of being like, hey, we want you to succeed and here are ways towards it, but also being in danger of sometimes just being like almost like nagging or critical and things like, and even as Paul gets into this whole passage about, here's what I want for you. I want, obey Jesus, do the right thing, and it's like, how's that tension for you of agonizing over people, but also not wanting to come across as someone that's just always worried about their lawn kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, what was funny was if there were people who were there second service, there was at the very end when I was kind of working through like, hey, this is what it's like to stand on the box full of Bibles, like the filled box versus the empty box. And I, kind of went off on a little bit of soapbox on different areas of whether or not we're operating with a biblical mindset or kind of more of a cultural and world mindset. And as I was, I think, starting to speed up my pace and also just my voice was probably raising in volume. There was this baby that cried out and goes, and everyone heard it and started laughing. And I think the baby was mimicking me. I think the baby, for what it could hear, was like, all I'm hearing is rah, 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 rah. But at the same time, I'm trying to make a good point. But it was funny because I think the adults in the room at least knew where I was coming from. But that's how the baby heard it. I probably sounded to him like the get off my lawn guy. And I think that that's just, passion is one of those things that is very compelling. And also sometimes depending upon how it's coming in your direction, it can also be very repelling.
Yeah.
And I think that it's hard not to run everything back to the lens of parenting because that's the life stage we're both in so much right now. But like, I can get really passionate with my kids of saying, make this decision because trust me, I know this is what's best. I know it's best based upon my own life experience. I believe what the scriptures say and Jesus taught. And there's times my kids be like, yeah. And there's other times they're just like, why are you yelling at me? Why are you treating me that way? And I feel like that, I had this picture and I don't know if this is, it probably isn't fully like this, but if Paul is in Rome in prison, and I've been to the place in Rome where the prison supposedly is, and it's in eyesight of the Colosseum. And so that's a fascinating picture of like, if he writes this word, if he's like hearing or seeing or whatever the Colosseum, he's aware of this constant cheering of teams. And he starts to think about how passionate he is for these Christians to be on the winning team. His passion is like, don't do this. Don't get deceived and get caught by this hollow and deceptive philosophy. And he'll go on in chapter 3 and say, and don't go back to the deeds of darkness and live as children of light and all these things. He's super passionate, and depending upon where the people are at, some of them it's going to be very compelling, and they're going to be like, yes. And I'm sure there's some of the Colossian Christians that got that letter and was like, it was repelling because it was like, oh my gosh, he's not coming to understand that the world's changing and this isn't that big of a deal. And I just think that you have to hold intention. Like, I'm going to at times be persuasive and my passion is going to be understood as like deep care and agony, and other times it's going to come across as maybe being divisive and cantankerous, and I just have to hold that tension, and a lot of that for me is like, even yesterday was my intonation and how I say it. And between first service and second service, I had a family come up to me and inform me that in the second service that there was a particular family that checked their kids in. Yep. And they wanted me to be aware that like this family probably is, going to hear what you say in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that was so helpful because I think I probably went more soapbox church, service 1, and my volume and everything else probably got more riled. And I was way more calculated and just calm in second service because I didn't want, and I was very intentional also to say, these boxes aren't just boxes. These boxes represent people, and people matter. You know what I mean? I was trying, and so I think that being aware of all those things is how you need to process how you let your agony and passion come out. Yeah. So long answer, but
no. And I think it's great. What I was thinking is so that's true of you, but it's true of every human being, because I mean, this is central to kind of some stuff I did in my own writing. Like, we all want to win.
Yeah.
We all are sitting on the bleachers cheering on a team. And so I'm a Chicago Bears fan, and they have this like unique thing happening where they have a quarterback who's okay, but because of the decision they made last year, they have like the top pick in the draft. And so there's a really great young college quarterback. I mean, if you were to go on any Chicago Bears blog site, Reddit things, there are a million opinions about what the Bears should do. And it's like heated. It's like all of those people are fighting and arguing online, and pundits are like, they should do this and they should do this, and all the ESPN people. Well, like, it's not because they hate the Bears. It's actually because they love the Bears and they want to see them win. And they, like, as a fan, I mean, fan comes from fanatic. You know, you want success. You want your team to do this. And here it's interesting as Paul steps in and says, like, but here's the way you're going to get it. And you think in your head what you need to do is, you know, fire that coach, you know, run these plays like that team. He's like, but actually the way that you don't quite understand the game, Jesus understands the game. And so my agony for you is that you would understand that, like, the way that you're trying to go about bringing success and victory in your life is actually not going to do it. And I thought that was just so interesting. I didn't know that was the root of the word agony. So it was in the way you did it. So that was really cool.
And I think that, you know, as I kind of start winding down here, like in, I don't know, three weeks worth of preaching left, and I'll still be here through June, but like a step down from the lead pastor role in a few weeks, you feel that sense of agony even more. And you're like, you just want to say, here's what I implore you and plead you to do in order to win. And I think that's going to be, and even when Paul says, my heart is with you, my heart is for you, but I'm 1,000 miles away from you. Like I'm just kind of like, it's hard not to even read the scripture and be like, that's going to be my reality so soon. And just want people to do well. And I don't know, it'll be interesting next few weeks how not to like impose my own life situation into the text. But I do think there's parallel of Paul just really caring for these people deeply. So
yeah, what was it? John said something about, he made the comment before service, like dropping his kid off to college and driving away. The agony, I want them to do well. I'm going to miss them. I'm not going to be there to really, like, there's so much of that going on. And it would have been for Paul as well. So yeah, this church, he didn't even know these people, but he was like, I want you to do well. And so the primary thing that Paul is ultimately addressing is unclear in Colossians. So it's like there's, you know, a whole litany of arguments and discussions about what exactly was Paul scared of.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't really get specific. In some other letters, he really gets clear. But you threw out a few of the most commonly put forward ideas, which make a lot of sense, being probably things about Judaism, Judaic law, trying to still come back in, some form of maybe early forms of Gnosticism and secret mystery knowledge and things, and then probably some form of like asceticism, which is where you have to like hurt yourself or like wound yourself in order to please the gods. It seems like some of his references seem like they're pointing a direction. And I thought maybe just for a few minutes, some of those can be like, that's pretty deep, heady stuff, but you know, it's maybe not like, let's talk about this on a stage, but maybe on a podcast. I think my first question would be this, and you can take this wherever you want. If somebody, and I'll start off with an example. When I was a youth pastor early on, I had a mom come to me and was irate with me, and brought the lead pastor in. We had a meeting. I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do?
Is that after you showed the Dumb and Dumber clip?
No. Okay. This was worse.
Okay.
And we sit down. I'm like, I'm in trouble. I don't know what's even going on. And she proceeds to say that her son went, and he was like 17. He went and got a tattoo. And it was my fault because I have a tattoo. Not because I told him to get a tattoo, because I have one.
Yeah.
And he broke God's law. And in some ways, I think that speaks a little bit into what might have been happening. You had people speaking to these Christians saying, no, you can't do that, this and this. You have to do this, this, and this, because that's the law of God. I'm wondering, like, if someone were to come to you and say, Brandon, like, I'm confused, like, and maybe they were in Colossians, like, what is the place of those laws? Because that's the Bible, right? That's God's word. Like, why would Paul say, no, you don't have to do those things anymore? Like, because that's kind of what he's wrestling with in some ways, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the hard part of even like the illustration of standing on God's word.
Because that's part of God's word.
Yeah, which part are we standing on here? Yeah. Which part are we...
Stoning witches is in the Bible.
Yeah, what are we applying, what are we not applying? Because there is still, it feels like cherry picking, and it feels like the entire Old Testament sometimes gets cherry picked, and even some parts of the New Testament. Like, wait a minute, what's literal, what's not? And I think that's the hard part of the scriptures. But in general, I think that Paul would would advocate the idea of an old and old covenant and new covenant, Old Testament, New Testament, that there's certain things that God put in place as a founder and also be father to really make the Jewish people distinct and to be set apart and to make them, in a way, holy, as that word would mean. But there was also the promise that God would come and make another way through a deliverer, through a Messiah, and eventually usher in a new covenant that would be made not just with the Jewish people, but with all people. And I think that when I look at the scriptures, I do hold more weight of authority towards what I would say is kind of the divine covenant documents for me to follow as a Jesus follower is in the New Testament, where the Old Testament gives me great information of God's character, a part of the story of what's got us here, but I don't think that they are binding commands any longer. But we still can see by looking at them things of which God, why he may have done that, like the tattoos and the braided hair and stuff like that. Like from my understanding, like there were distinct groups of people of that time that would brand their skin or have their hair certain ways to worship the gods and things like that. And so God was like, you're not to be like those people and to associate with those gods. Like I am your only God. And so to carry forth, like no one should ever have a tattoo. Well, one, we don't see it in the New Testament in general, like to say it's continuing over to be binding, but also the heart of God wanting us to be set apart, that hasn't changed across covenants. And so I think it is, it probably does. It depends on who you're talking to, of what they really hold to and say, well, that's from the Old Testament and it's still the New Testament, it's still binding. No, it's not any binding. Like, I don't think there's a cut and dry answer to that. I would just say that I put way more, like my covenant document is the New Testament as a follower of Jesus, and my informative document to how we got here is the Old Testament.
So that was the softball. Here comes the fast pitch.
Okay.
I don't know. Let's dig deeper. You very politely danced around what you were saying a second ago. But there was a couple who would have been probably offended by your statements about same-sex marriage. Okay, so your Bible says in Leviticus, man should not sleep with man, but we don't go by the Old Testament. So why are you still telling me that's wrong?
Well, there's continuity with that subject, both in the Old and New Testament. I think that Jesus addresses marriage as between a man and a woman. Paul talks about in the book of Romans, just essentially when we go in the direction of the flesh, of one of the results he talks about men laying with other men, women laying with other women, and we have different examples of like the acts of the flesh and sinful nature, and there's at times that word homosexual gets translated in the English is there. So I think that there are New Testament precedents and authoritative scriptures that bring forth the command of the Old Testament and still show it to be weighted and authoritative in the New Testament. And so that's why.
So it's not just something that was Old Testament law. It's something that's part
New Testament
of New
as well.
Testament. That's why we stand on it.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's good gospel and clarity there. So.
I mean, so that's why I would say that I would hold to that versus like tattoos.
Right.
I don't seem to be still binding.
Cool. Change the subject. That was a heavy one. This one is super easy. I am not saying that this is what Paul meant. I literally don't know what Paul meant. I can only read his words. It appears that there is a tension happening among Christians that, and this is, I don't like to go too much into this because it's vague and confusing. What is Gnosticism as a philosophy? All these kinds of things. It doesn't even matter. But one thing I see that I feel like carries over into the book of Corinthians is a propensity among Christians, and I know you have opinions about this, we talked about it, to think or feel in their head that to be a better Christian is to go deeper spiritually and to find a higher level of sort of mysticism, or because that is really what's happening in some ways. I definitely see that in Corinthians. Colossians, it feels like, hey, don't be led astray by, because when he says like, foolish arguments and things, it's too easy to just say, don't be led astray by the person that wants you to worship Zeus. Well, they already knew they weren't supposed to worship Zeus. it's probably more likely it's like, don't be led astray by the person that says, and there's a phrase about worship of angels,
Yeah.
which probably has not necessarily like worship of angels, but in the sense of like, I'm breaking the core command to worship no one other than God. It's probably something more like an extreme focus or adoration on angelic things, spiritual things, deeper spiritual meanings. And for Paul, like, I can't then read Corinthians and not believe that Paul believed in deeper spiritual things,
Right.
and encouraged us to, explore gifts of the Spirit and things, but also this warning, this like, hey, don't go down that road where you had experience in that. We all have. How do you pastor people through when you feel like that might be becoming an issue in their life?
Yeah, I mean, I think even the passage from yesterday, I mean, he talks about having your roots go down deeper. So there's precedence to say that our walk with Christ should continue to mature and have greater depth.
But what is depth?
And depth, and I think that's the definition of that is, I think that there are levels of intellect and knowledge to know of the wisdom and knowledge of God and such that we need to continue to pursue. And you can go deeper in your understanding, just as I can go deeper in my understanding of my wife. What I know of her when I got married to 17 years later, I have a much richer and deeper well to draw from my experiences with her, my conversations with her, my studying of her. It sounds weird to say that, but like, just like, why does she do this and this? Like, and I think those are things that we are continue to understand with God. And there's a depth to him that I don't even think that we'll ever get to the bottom of because he's God. And so I think that the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom in God is absolutely what we should be doing. I just think that if it stays there and depth is only what is in between my ears versus what is actuated through my life, then the purpose of that depth of knowledge can be used as a way to keep other people from God. Because you're saying, well, if you only knew this much, or you had this experience, or you had this form of intellect, then you truly know. And it's like, well, we know that there's varying levels of intelligence. We know that there are different opportunities that people have access to information, also, and I do believe that God loves all people. So I think that like a part of it is why he talks about fruit. Like a good tree will bear good fruit. And so with whatever you are, retaining and learning, if it's not changing your character and being acted out through your life, then I think that your depth piece, you could have great depth of intellect, but you could have really bad fruit. And so for me, depth is a combination of great information as well as application. And I just think that there are experiences to be had with the Lord that are very personalized and individualized. Like I have those, and you've had those, and that's very intimate. But to then use those as a way of placing myself in a hierarchical position that I have attained something more than somebody else, I think is where it can get really scary. I think right now I had this in my notes, I didn't use it, but like even like in my research, there's this drug right now that's really popular, I guess, in Hollywood called ayahuasca. I don't know if you know about this.
Aaron Rodgers did.
Aaron Rodgers, Will Smith.
I don't know what it is,
but it's really it's this drug that's used to really try to escape reality. But you are supposedly having this experience with a spiritual being, and then when you kind of come out of the stupor, you've had a secret experience that has really given you insight to how to really live life. I don't buy that. I don't think you need ayahuasca drugs to somehow experience God at a different level and then put you at a superior level over the other people. I think that's where I feel like that. Even if you were to say like the angel worship, like I got visited by an angel and you didn't, so I'm more spiritual. Well, it's like, I just think when we start jockeying for spiritual authority based upon experience or knowledge at the expense of people who might not have had that experience or the opportunity to have that knowledge, then that's when I get really, like, my claws come out in terms of like, oh, you're deeper, huh? Like, well, how is this changing your life though?
And that's been helpful for me. There've been many ways that our time together has sanded down some of my rough edges. But that was one of them for sure. Like when you and I first met, I was very like spiritually arrogant. But it wasn't like a I'm better than you arrogant. It was a no, this is the way to go deeper. We need like more prayer meetings. We all need to pray in tongues. Yeah. Like, the worship needs to be longer and more intense. That's depth.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up with what you just described. I grew up with the opposite. Like, but I've now seen it in my life where depth. Now I started being to encounter people who use depth to speak of. Well, I know the original Greek, or I know that agonizing means, so, I grew up where depth was I cast out demons and pray for the sick, and if you don't do that, you're not a deep Christian.
Yeah.
What's interesting though is they're just different forms of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And both of them are part of a good and healthy life, but using them to define depth is dangerous. I had somebody ask me yesterday. They sent me a text the day before, and it was actually Cody, and just a super random question about God being perfect and how can a perfect God have feelings and emotions, because perfection doesn't change. I mean, you're talking like doesn't get more philosophical than that. And I responded by not I didn't really straight up answer the question. Instead, I said, well, hold on. What do you mean by perfect? And Jesus says in the scriptures, be perfect as God is perfect. And the problem with the word perfect is when I hear the word perfect, especially in English, I think of without mistake, without error. Like you'll never trip if you're like Jesus would never trip on a stone if he was perfect. But really, like the Greek word, the word that we translate as perfect means it also could be fully mature, right? It could be being what it's supposed to be, reaching its conclusion and reaching its point. And I think when we use the word depth, I think you're completely right. Like Paul told me what depth was very clearly. He said it's love, joy, peace, kindness, faithfulness. Like when you have reached a place as a human being that you look like a human being's supposed to look, that's as deep as Paul is saying we should go. All the other things are helping us get there.
Yeah.
And so I think when he's agonizing over the church here in Colossians, he'll then agonize in a very different way with the Corinthians.
That's true. Yeah, and I think that both need to be honored, just not elevated above the other. Like I think that my mindset was shaped big time because of my background in terms of my family. Like I went through phases where I met you in college, and you brought into my life experience with the Holy Spirit that I had never even considered possible. Filled with the Spirit, speaking in tongues, longer prayer meetings, extended worship, all of those types of things were super formative in me, especially because I came to Christ later as a 18-year-old that really didn't have a lot of that experience growing up. And so I ran into this category for a while. I was like, okay, this is what it means. This is what it means. This is what it means. And I think it is a means to the end of where we're supposed to go in depth. And for a while, though, what I found is I became more and more arrogant, and I became more and more like coming home to my family and telling them that this is what they need to experience if they're really a Christian. And I began to watch the fracturing that took place in my family because of that. And it wasn't anyone's fault. It was just like
family,
like my immediate family, my mom, and my dad, and my brothers and sisters. Gotcha. Okay. And I'm from a small farm town. My dad he has a high school degree. He didn't, go to college, and he's an auctioneer and all that stuff. And I remember like having these moments where I was like, I'm not trying to be arrogant. I'm agonizing. I'm wanting you to win. I'm wanting you to have something that I have and I think is important. But then there was also a moment where I felt God like say to me, like, your dad is a lot like every single person in the New Testament that just I walked by and didn't have the education and all this stuff. Like, so like, how does this relate to him? And it kind of swung me the other way, saying like, okay, how do I have a both and? How do we want to seek the depths of God and experience, but at the same time, there's got to be a place that my high school diploma father can experience God and not have to have this high levels of intellect of what the Greek is and all that kind of stuff, and keep welcoming him into these things, and to see within my dad and my mom, he's bearing fruit. Like he is those fruits of the Spirit. And so it's why Paul says there's gifts and there's fruit. He's a fruit inspector, but he gives the gift to help cultivate the fruit. So it's just like I took out or and said and I think the and is what makes depth. So,
well, and at the end of the day too, the most confrontingly like blunt thing that I think Paul will say is like, it's okay to put these things in a hierarchy. Like they're not all equal.
Yeah.
The most important is like the truest sign of maturity is loving other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so he even says, like, if I speak the tongues of angels or know all the mysteries of the world,
Yeah,
but I
have
don't
not
love
love.
people, it's worthless. So he doesn't, I don't think he would want you to read that passage and say, so knowledge or spiritual experiences are important. He's just saying, like, if you think ultimate depth or true Christianity is those things rather than washing someone's feet, like, you've misunderstood Jesus. And I think that's what he's agonizing. Don't fall into those traps of thinking those things are ultimately to be rooted in Christ is to follow his example and love people, which sucks because it's easier to get head knowledge than love people. And it's way easier to sit by myself and worship than to love people.
Yeah. And this is not, you're smarter than I am, but I think both of us are fairly intelligent people. And I think that there's times where you learn things, you experience things, and then you hear somebody else say something and you just know, like, that's not right. Like that's not right. But my character side of humility has to then kick in and say, okay, how can I help bring that person to a better understanding versus make them feel stupid?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I don't it's a weird thing to say. I don't actually think it's true that I'm smarter than you. I think what oftentimes we mean by that is like my brain tends to like to just read and get lost in ideas. And that sometimes looks like some kind of different form of intelligence. I think like, I don't know, but I lean towards that because it's interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
So like, to me, knowledge is not like, I was talking to my wife about this last night. I'm not, it's not like I'm think in my head that the better I know the scriptures, the better Christian I am. Like, I know in my head that actually loving people makes me a better Christian. I'm just interested. Like when you say, oh, this is what the word agonizing means. Oh, it does? Really? Like my brain just goes, like I enjoy it. So like,
and
for me,
it's a gift
it's
for
just
all
fun.
of us. And it's a gift for all of us. Like I just, I think that's one of the behind the scenes things at Rise City that people don't realize is just like your tenacity for information and learning and not just learning, but your study of wisdom wants to have application to it. It's like, it's so good. Like it's such a helpful resource. And I've told you that before. That's one of the things I'm like scared to death not to have. I've been making a lot of phone calls. Like, hey, what does this word mean? Hey, help me with this. Like,
I'm sure there's plenty of people there that know.
Anyway, I don't know about that.
No, and I was just saying that because like I think I've really, it's part of me growing up too, is realizing the way that number one, knowledge absolutely puffs up, and like if the Holy Spirit's not constantly deflating, but also like spiritual experiences puff up.
Yeah.
And like you talked about in our staff meeting, was it last week? Just like how differently we all experience God. And my brain doesn't want to accept that, right? My brain wants to say, no, this is how you experience God, because that's how I experience God. So if you're not experiencing God the way I am, you're not as good of a Christian.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just, man, it's so, there's so many traps around us that you can fall into.
I remember, I think it was in college or maybe after, even like, maybe the professor pointed this out, but like even studying the book of Acts, like it's an interesting journey in Acts to see that it's so heavy with God experiences and gifts and miracles and manifestations. But then you start turning the corner after Acts 15 and it becomes a lot more suffering, becomes a lot more like Paul, like, I want to go here, but evidently I can't go here. It's like the miracles start to subside and the reliance and dependence really kick into high gear. Outside of when Paul gets bit by a snake that comes out of fire and it doesn't bother him. But it just even that part, I think maybe that is a microcosm of the Christian life, that God gifts us. And I think he gifts us these things to really draw our hearts close to him, to help other people come to know him. But as you grow, right, like some of those things, like I can't rely on all those experiences. I have to have responsibility and I have to like keep pressing in. And so
I think that I would just say though, I would make sure and clarify, like, I wasn't saying that age has changed the way I experience God.
Yeah.
It's taught me not to force it on other people.
Okay.
If I'm not this is so my way of experiencing God is like this morning. It was my Bible, my journal, and my headphones alone in the auditorium for an hour.
Yeah.
Like that is me hearing him. That's me being filled up. I don't want to push that on other people, but if I'm not personally doing that,
Yeah.
I'm not going to stay rooted in him. Because that I however you experience God, whatever your process is, find it and keep doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, the bicycle.
You're right.
Like,
You're right.
So I'm not saying you don't need to do it my way, but whatever your way is, if you're not keep pedaling, you're going to tip over.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely is my way. And it's even like when I actually step back and look at it, it's so obviously not for everybody. Like I put my hood over my head and like disappear like a turtle, and like why would I think other people want this? It's the introvert in me experiencing God.
Yeah.
And
Which tells us how awesome God is, that he is
ways.
so vast in the ways that he speaks to us. And yeah, it's awesome.
Well, cool. This was fun. A few more. 3 more.
3 more sermons. I'll be around until June. I'll just give clarity. I said yesterday, like, ending in March. I'm ending preaching in March, but we'll still be here to church and attending and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, 3 more sermons through Colossians, and then I'll be doing the men's retreat too, which will be fun.
Yeah.
So.
And this question came up too, and we'll be addressing this a lot more, but we are going to have a big farewell moment, but we're going to wait until May, so it's not like weird. So if kids was wondering that, like your last Sunday, the 24th, we'll have some things going on, but it won't be like, because you're still here for a couple more months. So, but we'll definitely be doing something in May. And so if you're wondering about that, or you're asking a question, we'll give more clarity on that as we go on. So
sounds good.
All right.
Well, have a great week, everyone. Whenever you listen to this, watch this, and we'll do it again next week.
Yep.
So
see you guys.
Hope to see you Sunday.